Disclaimer, this video began production in March of 2026. If I say anything out of date, you know why. Thank you.
Hey, it's me. Something I've come to realize lately with the Roblox community is that a lot of the player base is depressed right now. And honestly, who wouldn't be? In the middle of all this chaos, the company responsible for making our childhood has completely lost the plot, and there's not much we can do about it. Keyword, not much. I have proposed a little idea as to what we can do during all this negativity. And what is that idea, you may ask? Being even more negative. If you were to go up to any Roblox player that was around in the years 2019 to 2021 and ask them, what's the worst type of Roblox game? They would probably respond with simulators. And yeah, simulators are incredibly derivative. They take almost no skill to make, revolve around the same terrible gimmicks, and honestly help pave the way for all the brain rot games that have invaded the platform. Look at this shit. But I'd argue there's actually a forgotten genre that's 10 times worse than simulators. Still better than brain rot though. I'm of course talking about camping games. If you somehow don't remember, camping or story games were a genre on Roblox where players will go on some kind of trip. Camping, hotels, bus rides, and a horror story unfolds with survival elements. On the surface, these games seem relatively harmless, but I think these games have cemented their legacy as a two-pack of ass. So today, we're revisiting a handful of these games to see if they still hold up today, even though they definitely don't. Now, despite what I'm gonna say later on, I do find these to be pretty earnest and genuine attempts at writing horror stories, despite them being shit. But before we rip these games to shreds, I think it's important to understand what made these games so popular in the first place. Because every single camping game follows the exact same formula. Friendly guide NPC, a peaceful trip somewhere, something goes horribly wrong, and then a monster shows up and starts murdering everybody. I'm not exaggerating, by the way, that's literally the entire genre. And it all started with one game, the original blueprint for this entire wave of story games, camping. So before we judge the clones, we need to go back to the source. The original camping still holds up, and I have a lot of nostalgia for it. The premise is simple. Up to 12 players go on a camping trip while mysterious things start happening. The story isn't really a story, it's more like a series of chaotic events that slowly lead to an ending. At the start, everyone spawns in, explores the campsite, and socializes before nightfall. But once it gets dark, the first major event happens. A monster attacks. Luckily, it's easy to survive because it only hits players who stand still. Add that to the list. After it leaves, a storm rolls in, and the rain actually damages players, so everyone has to hide in the tents or the cave. The next day, things get worse. One of the tents collapses, forcing everyone to spend the night inside the cave. During another heavy storm, someone has to run outside and retrieve the lunch basket, because apparently someone thought, hey guys, let's leave it outside. Problem is the rain hits hard, so convincing someone to do it is almost impossible. Hell, the only reason I even tried in this one is because I had the umbrella. After the basket is returned, we discover one of the sandwiches is poisoned, and a random player instantly dies. Yeah, write that down. Right after that tragedy, the cave begins collapsing and everyone has to choose a path. Pick the wrong one and it's instant death. Add it to the list. From here, the event changes depending on the playthrough. Either you do an obby or you run through a maze while being chased by bears. I got the bear maze, so yeah, I was suffering. But the obby is important too, so that goes on the list. After escaping the cave, everyone relaxes during the daytime until night hits again and someone gets kidnapped. Another deadly storm happens before the finale, and eventually darkness spreads across the ground, forcing everyone to climb to higher ground. And this is the pivotal moment. The reason this entire genre exists. The plot twist. The monster returns, but when the sun rises, it becomes paralyzed. Then it reveals that it was actually trying to help the players the whole time. Instead, the real villain was one of us. A randomly selected player was responsible for the poison sandwiches. The game ends with a final shot of them holding a knife. Yeah, definitely write that down. That one moment alone brings back so many memories. Overall, the original camping is still solid. Some sections drag a bit and there isn't much player interaction, not to mention the fact that it seems determined to kill at least half of the players, but nothing's perfect. But now, we finally have the blueprint for what makes camping work. An antagonist, a random player dying, a two-way choice where one option is instant death, an obstacle course, and of course, the plot twist. And no, not real camping, the game, you idiot! These 5 things basically became the DNA for every camping game that came after it. Alright, now let's get into the slop. Our first slop on the list is Vacation. Released in 2019, it's basically a spiritual successor to another camping clone we'll get to later. I'm ranking these off popularity and nostalgia, not obscurity. And somehow, this one still pulls around 1,000 players daily, which is wild because this game is aggressively mid. Anyway, let's talk story. This game bumps the original player count up to 18 instead of the usual 12. Cool, so we're all going on a nice vacation. Where? I don't know, but I hope it's not what I think it is.
I know that's not what I think it is.
After settling on the plane, the game wastes no time as the lights flicker, and shortly after the antagonist appears on the wing. Keep in mind that every monster in the genre looks like this. Then there's the classic escape the monster set piece, and afterwards, the engine fucking sets on fire. That caught me off guard, I'm not gonna hold you. But this results in the plane crashing in the ocean. After landing, if you can even call it that, everyone is forced to stand on one of the wings. And this immediately raises a question. If the players managed to survive, why didn't anyone else? The pilot, sure. Co-pilot, fine. But the flight attendants were walking around handing out pizza 5 minutes ago, and now they're just gone? Ladies and gentlemen, we've discovered our first plot hole. We drift to a desert island, find some apples, night hits, thunderstorm starts, and the rain damages you, so we hide in a cave. Sound familiar? Oh, just wait till you hear this shit. So after that, the cave collapses on itself, and we're forced to do an obby to get out quickly before we get crushed. The jokes write themselves. After escaping, we chill until nighttime and the monster finally returns to torment the players once again. So now we have to do a maze to escape his clutches once. Bro, are you like again? This maze is easy as hell, as unlike camping, there's no bears trying to kill us. Anyway, someone gets kidnapped right after. Bro, I can't. We save them, gather logs, start a fire using my flint necklace. What the fuck? And then the fire starts spreading and immediately burns the entire island. Some of the trees started falling and I died because of it. On my second run, everyone died early, so it was just me. Anyway, once it's daytime, we notice a small yacht in the distance. After getting its attention, we head on over, and that's the end of the story. Definitely one of the more formulaic games as opposed to some of the other games we'll be talking about in this video. So what did we learn? I think it's pretty evident that these games are not afraid to shy away from how blatant they are. Vacation follows camping structure almost beat for beat, but completely misses why it worked. And it results in a lot of plot holes and things that straight up don't make sense. For instance, the plot hole I brought up earlier. The flight attendants were roaming through the plane from the very start and even gave us pizza. So why didn't they survive? There's no acknowledgement of any of the flight crew after the plane crashes. And then there's the monster. There's a brief instance of discussion, which is optional, and we don't learn anything about it. The monster shows up with zero explanation. It's just there because the game needs conflict. Now, I don't want this to be on par with a fucking Japanese manga in terms of writing. Don't get it twisted, I'm not looking for a deep emotional experience. No. I just wanted to make sense. Remember those apples? Those were apparently rotten, but the thing is, literally no one is supposed to die from them. So what was the point? Alright, because camping did it. Now to be fair, it's not all bad. The game actually looks great, and it's way more polished than most of these clones. The story, despite having numerous flaws, is straightforward. There's no brainless plot twist and no unnecessary padding. Remember this for later. But as the first real copy on this list, yeah, it's not amazing. Still, it's held onto a player base, and there are secret endings if you care enough to find them. But I'm only here for the main content. Now, if you thought this was rough, the next game is on a completely different level. And I mean atrocious. Next up is Daycare, and yeah, this one's infamous. Not because it copies the formula, but because it tries to reinvent it and completely fumbles. Daycare was created by Parwaz Studios, helmed by Munib. What a name. And oddly enough, it's the same guy who made Vacation, so we're in for a treat with this one. It reverts the player count back to the classic 12, which isn't a problem. We got bigger fish to fry anyway. The story follows everyone being transformed into a bunch of toddlers to attend a daycare for 2 days. Could you tell I was in the server with a bunch of children? Everything starts normal. Food, exploring, the usual, until the power cuts out and Lily, the caretaker, just leaves. Alone. With a bunch of toddlers. In the dark. This singular moment immediately raises suspicion against her and makes you question her negligence as a caretaker, because leaving a bunch of kids by themselves while you go do something else is just a stupid decision, especially when the power goes out. This bitch has no idea what she's doing. Anyway, this is when the antagonist appears, another generic monster. At least his design is somewhat distinct from the other ones in the genre. We get chased around for a little bit and then Lily and the power returns. Afterwards, we go to bed. Once morning hits, breakfast, playtime, and Lily leaves again, puts a random kid in charge, and the monster comes back, this time setting the place on fire. You have to grab the fire extinguisher to put out the flames. You know, like what toddlers do. After that, the group decides, yeah, this daycare is a death trap, and we try to escape. Vent leads nowhere, so naturally, we break her door and run into the forest. As one does. We're supposed to grab apples and eat them, but oh no! They're rotten! And whoever eats them takes damage. I feel like I've heard this before. Once it's nighttime, we vote on whether to build a shelter or a campfire. And I shit you not, we split up, gather logs, and build whichever one was voted on. Then rain wipes out everything anyway, so we hide in a cave. Again, the monster kidnaps someone, we chase it to a cabin, and then find them trapped in a capsule with a button. Press it, they die. Don't press it, we break them out. The floor opens beneath us and we fall on the ground and do yet another obby. After heading to the top, there's a standstill. Now before we get to the endings, I want to preface this by saying that this game was ludicrously stressful to record. This game is packed with younger players. People die or leave constantly, which basically locks you into one outcome most of the time. You're essentially locked into the secret ending, which I got on my literal first playthrough. I had to grab footage from someone's video on Daycare just to get the bad ending. Now if the person that was kidnapped from earlier gets killed, you get the bad ending. You reach the top of the cave, Lily's there, and the monster shows up, only for it to be revealed that he was Lily the whole time, which doesn't make sense. Why run a daycare just to terrorize kids? Why not just do that? This game is so ass. The good ending tries to fix this. If you save the kidnapped player, Lily's spirit shows up. She reveals the monster killed her, but the monster says that there is no way she should be here right now. But Lily is pissed. She then obliterates it before finally passing on. She then vanishes, never to be seen again. But here's the issue. Most players will never see that, so they're stuck with a confusing twist that doesn't hold up. Also, how do we get out of the cave? So what actually goes wrong with Daycare? It's not the concept. Turning players into toddlers in a horror setting, that's actually a solid twist. The problem is execution. To be as articulate as I possibly can, this game plays like it was written by 5 different people who never actually spoke to each other. Every scenario feels like it was added because it sounds interesting, not because it makes sense. You've got toddlers, fighting fires, surviving in the wilderness, making strategic decisions, breaking out of buildings. Who are these kids? Why are they more capable than grown adults? And the game just expects you to roll with it. Then there's the structure. Instead of building tension naturally, Daycare just resets the danger over and over again. Power outage, calm. Fire, calm. Forest, calm. Cave, tranquil. Nothing sticks, nothing develops. It's just a loop of something bad happens without any real build-up. Which brings us to the biggest issue, the story. Dear God, this story. The twist in the bad ending is straight up confusing. Lily being the monster raises more questions than answers, and since it's the ending most players will get, that confusion becomes the takeaway.
I also neglected to mention another thing. That thing being why the bad ending is so easy to get. To be brief, the choice that initiates the ending is very confusing. Because upon entry into the cabin, the only option in front of you seems to be the button. But that ends up killing the captured player. The issue is, there's nothing to indicate otherwise. There's no hint telling you you're making a mistake. The button is seemingly the only option. And when the player is killed, you have no choice but to view the bad ending. Something barely in your control. It's a pointless and stupid bait and switch that does more harm than good. Just wanted to clear that up a bit. And yes, I am using the 11 Labs voice. I think it's funny.
And yeah, the good ending explains it, but locking the coherent version of your story behind a harder outcome, actually is it harder? Is a terrible decision. Most players won't see it, so the story just fails. Now there is a secret ending I got, and I know I said in the previous segment that I would only cover the main content, but I got this by accident. Basically what happens is you have to be the last player alive, and then eventually you reach the monster's base, where you find a sword and kill him. Cinema. And finally, the player experience. Because of the younger player base, people are constantly dying or leaving, which means choices don't feel meaningful, endings feel out of your control, and replaying becomes frustrating instead of fun. So instead of feeling like a branching story, it feels like RNG, and that's really what Daycare comes down to. It's not broken because it tried something new. It's broken because it didn't commit to making those ideas actually work. Anyway, what's next? Airplane is definitely one of the more well-known camping games, and for good reason. Back in 2019, this thing felt different. It inspired games like Vacation, and at the time it was basically a trailblazer for the genre. Now don't get me wrong, it still follows the same formula. Weird monster, disaster after disaster, somebody probably dies, standard camping game stuff. But Airplane actually experiments with the formula instead of just repainting it. Also, this game makes you freakishly tall for some reason. I don't fucking know. The story starts with us boarding the plane and getting settled in. The crew hands out sandwiches, and immediately the game does something smarter than most camping clones. One random player turns out to be allergic to mayonnaise? Nah, that's a terrible life. And this is where Airplane separates itself from the pack. A lot of camping games pretend you have choices, but the outcomes are usually scripted anyway. Here, the players directly decide whether someone survives. That tiny bit of interaction instantly makes the scenario more memorable. Anyway, once it's nighttime, the monster appears on the wing. The same old black figure with glowing red eyes look. Hey, I said it did some things right, not everything. But then the game immediately switches things up again. Instead of the monster chasing us around, he decides to play passive and releases snakes into the cabin, which honestly is smarter. Why risk getting jumped by 15 giant passengers where you can just weaponize reptiles. We hide in the bathroom while the snakes spread throughout the plane, and once things calm down, the captain announces the oxygen levels are dropping. So now we're scrambling for oxygen masks before everybody passes out. Then the game escalates from slightly concerning flight to fucking terrorism because someone suddenly gets strapped with a bomb. We have to cut either the red wire or the blue wire. Thankfully we picked correctly because I was not trying to turn this review into a memorial video. After that we go check on the crew and they're dead. You see, this is a death that makes sense. Somewhat. We get worried about the captain, crack the code to his room, and finally confront the monster. And this man reveals that the entire trip was part of his master plan, and that also doesn't make sense. How did bro manage to orchestrate like 15 random people booking the exact same flight? Did he email us? Was there a demonic WhatsApp call? Anyway, we start smashing buttons until autopilot activates, contact emergency services, and are told someone needs to take control of the pilot seat. Whoever reaches it first decides the ending. The monster appears one final time and gives us two choices: crash the plane or save everybody. If you choose the good ending, the monster calls humans weak and leaves, which is funny because bro still had snakes available. He absolutely could have kept going. And if you choose to crash the plane, literally what every YouTuber was doing back in 2019, it's revealed that the player was secretly working for the monster the whole time. Now yeah, that twist is a little goofy, but I actually respect it for one reason. At least Airplane tried to do something memorable. That alone puts it above a huge chunk of camping games. Airplane became one of the most remembered camping games back in 2019. The game never stopped escalating. Every couple of minutes there's a new disaster getting thrown at you. Allergic reactions, snakes, oxygen failure, bombs, dead pilots. This is less of a flight and more of a live leak waiting to happen. But unlike a lot of camping games, Airplane actually makes the players participate in these scenarios instead of just standing around watching NPCs collapse dramatically. And that tiny difference completely changes the experience. In most camping games, the formula is usually monster appears, everybody hides, a random player dies, repeat. But Airplane constantly gives the player something to do. They're searching for medicine, grabbing oxygen masks, cutting bomb wires, racing to the cockpit. It keeps the player engaged instead of turning them into background extras in someone else's story. That pacing carries the entire game because if you really stop and think about the story for more than 10 seconds, it completely falls apart. The monster's entire plan makes absolutely no sense. How did this man organize an entire flight full of random people? And the monster himself is still painfully generic. It's literally just dark figure with glowing red eyes for the 400th time. Camping games were obsessed with this design back then, and they treated glowing red eyes like it was the peak of horror. But I will give Airplane credit for one thing. There's actually a hidden ending during the snake section where you can enter a secret portal, and suddenly the game gets weirdly deep out of nowhere. Inside this dark room, the monster finally reveals his name is Donald, and apparently he used to be human. According to him, he died of a heart attack on a previous flight while the player was present and nobody bothered to help him. He says everybody moved on and forgot about him, and then offers a soul for a soul trade before killing the player. And while the writing isn't exactly cinema, this is the kind of stuff I mean when I say Airplane had ambition. Most camping games would have just left the monster as evil creature because yes, but Airplane actually tried giving him backstory, hidden lore, secret endings, and alternate outcomes. It made the game feel bigger than just survive random disasters for 20 minutes. The game moves fast. Before you can even question one scenario, the game is already throwing another disaster at you, which sort of makes sense as it's, the shortest game on this list. And weirdly enough, that kind of chaos works in its favor. It feels like the developers were just brainstorming the most insane things possible and saying yes to every single one. It's ridiculous and a little weird, but it's memorable ridiculous. And that matters way more than people think. And honestly, I think multiple endings helped a lot too. Back in 2019, every Roblox YouTuber alive was crashing the plane for the evil ending because apparently nobody wanted to survive. But giving players that final choice made the game feel bigger than most camping stories at the time. Even the traitor twist, as goofy as it is, deserves some credit. I mean, camping literally did the same thing, but just a little bit better. Because at least Airplane tried to leave the player with something memorable instead of ending with the monster dies and everyone goes home. And that's really the best way to describe Airplane as a whole. It's messy, dumb, overdramatic, and sometimes makes absolutely no sense, but it actually had ambition. So, after looking through these games, I had a lot of fun, full stop. However, my thoughts on these games have changed. The nostalgia has left me and now I look at these games with a much more level head. And that's cool, but man, that was something, huh? A collection of drastic formulaic stories, some terrible, some surprisingly enjoyable, and most somewhere in between. And looking back, you can really tell the difference between a game that was chasing a trend and one that was made for people to enjoy themselves. And as much as I wanted to go over more games before reaching this segment, with recent Roblox changes, a lot of these games are either gone entirely or simply don't function the way they used to. However, At the beginning, I said that the main purpose of this video was to be negative. I've decided to walk back that statement, as there still were games that rose above the rest, but not for arbitrary reasons. These games surpassed expectations because they understood something a lot of others didn't. Good stories aren't carried by monsters, they're carried by the experiences players have along the way. So while we still have some time left, let's talk about the good ones. I'm gonna need you guys to bear with me because none of this footage is mine. The three games I want to highlight are Horror Portals, Break-In, and Circus Trip. Let's start with Horror Portals. Unlike most story games, Horror Portals wasn't one adventure. It was essentially several different horror campaigns bundled into a single experience. Instead of joining a lobby and immediately starting a story, players entered a central hub and chose which portal they wanted to explore. One of the most popular stories was Happy Birthday Isabella. What starts as a seemingly normal birthday celebration quickly turns into a horror experience as players uncover the truth behind Isabella and the events surrounding the celebration. Again, this isn't Shakespeare level literature, but it's actually something. The game puts effort into building its characters, establishing mysteries, and creating tension. The horror elements are surprisingly refined, especially after years of updates. It can drag at times, but Flamingo's acting definitely sells it.
Never asked me if I wanted a new mother! You never asked me about my feelings!
Another portal led to
Holmes Hospital, which was probably the strongest story of the bunch.
Players explored a creepy abandoned medical facility filled with dark hallways, strange encounters, and some genuinely effective horror moments. Visually, it was easily the most impressive of the three stories, and the atmosphere carried much of the experience. Then there was Jolly's Carnival, which leaned heavily into the classic creepy carnival aesthetic. Clowns, attractions, chaos, and just enough weirdness to make everything feel unsettling. Gameplay-wise, Horror Portals wasn't radically different from the other story games. Players moved through scripted events, completed objectives, and survived encounters with various threats. The difference was replayability. Most story games offered one adventure and called it a day. Horror Portals offered several completely different stories under one roof. The stories themselves weren't always revolutionary, but the concept definitely was. A connected collection of horror experience with a recurring lore, unique settings, and enough variety to keep players coming back. At a time when countless developers were busy copying camping, Horror Portals was one of the few games actively trying to push the genre forward. If Horror Portals experimented with the structure of story games, Break-In perfected the formula itself. Break-In is probably one of the most important story games Roblox has ever seen. The premise is simple. You and a group of players move into a new neighborhood and spend the first day settling into your house. But things quickly take a turn when strange warnings begin appearing on the television. Before long, a criminal gang known as the Purge starts targeting the neighborhood, led by the game's iconic villain, Scary Larry. What? Unlike many story games where players mostly watched events unfold, Break-In constantly gave players things to do, even more than Airplane. You searched drawers for money, collected food to restore energy, bought items from the store, and prepared for upcoming attacks. During the night, players had to defend the house, block entrances, and survive increasingly dangerous encounters. As the story progresses, players eventually leave the safety of the house and venture into Scary Larry's territory. This leads to one of the game's most memorable moments, a boss fight against Scary Larry himself. For a Roblox story game in 2019, having a genuine boss battle felt surprisingly ambitious. The game also featured multiple endings depending on player decisions and performance. There were secret endings, hidden badges, and optional objectives scattered throughout the experience. Because of this, Break-In wasn't just a game you finished once. Players had reasons to come back and see what they missed, and that's what separated it from many of its competitors. It was a story game mixed with survival mechanics, exploration, and progression systems. It felt like an actual game first and a scripted adventure second. It was an industry-defining giant, and it's still the most popular camping game all these years later. Oh my god, these big ass words, I need to chill. Finally, there's Circus Trip. Out of all the three games, Circus Trip is probably the one people remember most for its atmosphere, aside from him. The story begins with a school field trip to the circus. At first, everything seems normal. The performers entertain the crowd, the attractions open, and the players are simply enjoying their visit. But as expected for a Roblox story game, things don't stay normal for long. Soon, players discover that something is seriously wrong with the circus. Dangerous situations start appearing around every corner, and what was supposed to be a fun trip turns into a fight for survival. One moment you're escaping from clowns, the next you're completing obstacle courses, running through dangerous attractions, or trying to survive environmental hazards. Compared to many story games where players spend long periods standing still and reading dialogue, Circus Trip kept players moving. Its villains were also surprisingly memorable. Characters like Giggles became iconic among fans of the game. I really just said Giggles, oh my god. Largely because the circus setting allowed the developers to create enemies that stood out from the generic monsters and shadow creatures common at the time. What made Circus Trip work wasn't necessarily the story itself. The plot follows many of the same beats as other games from the era. What made it memorable was presentation. The colorful circus environment mixed with horror elements created an atmosphere that felt unique compared to the forest, campsites, schools, and airplanes that dominated created the genre. Looking back, these 3 games represent some of the best ideas the story game genre had to offer. Horror Portals experimented with structure by giving players multiple stories in one game. Break-In refined the formula with resource management, replayability, and meaningful gameplay. And Circus Trip proved that a strong setting and memorable villains could carry an entire experience. Even during an era flooded with copycats, these games found ways to stand out. And that's probably why people still talk about them today while so many other games have been forgotten. Alright, well, that's the end. You know, despite looking at these games from a completely objective angle and trying to discard nostalgia, I still enjoyed every minute of making this video, despite how f***ing long it took. But I really have nothing new to say here that I didn't say in the intermission segment. These games just ended up being copies of each other, no matter how much I liked them, with a few exceptions like we just went over. My main issue is the fact that while I was blinded by nostalgia for the most part, it seems that, you know, this era of Roblox games is not that different from what we have today. The main difference being that profit wasn't the driving source of these games existing in the first place. It was just people having fun and not really caring, just doing what they wanted to do. And that's kind of sad, you know, especially with Roblox decaying as we speak, you know, just all these terrible updates and shit. It's messed up. But I'm gonna leave you with one question. Do you ever think we're gonna reach this level of creative passion on the Roblox platform in current year? Do you ever think we'll come back to this? Something to think about. Thanks for watching.